My name is Jillian Leva, and this is my English ISP on Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. Okonkwo is a tragic character whose life gets consumed by the idea of traditional masculinity after growing up in poverty. When finally becoming the epitome of what a man should be like, this ultimately becomes a tragic flaw because of his fear of weakness and cultural rejection, leading to his suicide. Children growing up in financially unstable households are typically susceptible to developing low self-esteem. Likewise, men with low self-esteem may consequently seek higher self-esteem through traditional male roles. Nevertheless, pursuing traditional male roles may cause men to resort to acts of violence in hope of maintaining masculinity, and if men commit acts of violence, this may lead to them experiencing feelings of guilt. Amateur psychology can be explained as the attempt to understand the cause and effects of human behavior, specifically beliefs, emotions, choices, and reactions. It emphasizes particular attention on the idea and feelings people have on their own value, potential, and ability to acknowledge and deal with pain. This lens solely focuses on the conscious mind, never the unconscious. In this image, the paparazzi are taking photos of a man with a background of trees, masking the horrifying state of the surrounding environment. This can be amateurly psychoanalyzed as to why the state of the earth is being dismissed by humans, which displays self-deception. Because humans neglect the significance of preserving the environment, this would ultimately cause global warming and the inevitable destruction of planet Earth. This can be caused by committing acts like deforestation and air pollution contributing to climate change. Rather than humans fixing this issue, they would rather mask the truth and proceed with harmful actions. Self-deception is a common concept when using the amateur psychology lens, as it showcases the behavior of a person's brain when dealing with their pain and inability to acknowledge it. This photo is also ironic as it's said to be taken on Earth Day, a day when humans are supposed to care for the Earth. Nevertheless, rather than doing so, they're simply taking photos of what a clean environment would look like. This photo is like a call out to society as it's dated in the future, warning people of the continuous dangers of people's irrational decisions pushing towards urbanization. As humans continue to pursue urbanization without caution, this may lead to irreversible actions like air pollution. As a result, the Earth is put at risk of destruction, potentially causing humans to neglect their harmful actions. Children growing up in financially unstable households are typically susceptible to developing low self-esteem. As the world is driven by a capitalist economy, financial stability may become a person's goal for security and survival purposes. Nevertheless, these expectations typically affect men as society has a sexist stereotype that masculinity is dependent on a man's ability to make money and be strong. As a result, when a man lacks such wealth, society may look down upon them. Likewise, when children are exposed to the stigma pushing for traditional masculinity, they most likely grow up to believe they must follow these gender roles and comply with society. Because people are social creatures, the child may tend to defer to the judgment of the group as a means of being accepted by the group. Additionally, as a child, parental figures are typically viewed as role models and a base for inspiration. Therefore, the lack of financial stability in their family may cause a child to feel inferior to others, potentially lowering their self-esteem. In Okonkwo's village, men take pride in their financial status and social class. The first lines of the novel introduces Okonkwo through his achievements, like how he is a well-known wrestler in the villages and has 3 wives. This showcases the significance of wealth and strength from the beginning of the novel, emphasizing how his village values men. Their masculinity is determined by traditional male stereotypes like a man's strength and ability to financially provide for their family. Okonkwo is consistently praised by the villagers for his independence and ability to outgrow his father's legacy. He managed to flourish in wealth and start his own family despite his disadvantaged childhood. Enoka, Okonkwo's father, was financially unstable, leading to a bad reputation with all the villagers. He was notorious for borrowing money from them, but was unable to pay back the favor. In fact, even after his death, his immense debt remained at large. As a result, Okonkwo grew up to be ashamed of his father because of his lack of manhood and social class. Throughout the novel, Okonkwo consistently describes his father as lazy and unsuccessful, thus strives to become the opposite of him. For example, a childhood memory resonated with him when another child described his father as an Agbala, which was another name for a woman, but also a man without a title. Okonkwo resented his father's failure and weakness out of embarrassment. Therefore, Okonkwo can be viewed as a child who developed low self-esteem growing up. This is because throughout Okonkwo's early childhood, he shows desperation in becoming successful, turning his low self-esteem as motivation to become well-respected. Men with low self-esteem may consequently seek higher self-esteem through traditional male roles. This may be because men often associate their self-worth with self-esteem, thus it feels necessary for them to find other methods of increasing their self-esteem. As a result, men may tend to strive towards increasing their masculinity as a means of increasing self-esteem. Men typically strive to exhibit such masculine traits to prove their worth and capabilities to others to seek acceptance from society. Thus, men with low self-esteem may embrace traditional male roles and potentially increase their masculinity, consequently increasing their self-esteem. Okonkwo consistently makes rash decisions that often affect his relationships with others. Nwoye, his eldest son, was ascribed to give Okonkwo great anxiety because of his incipient laziness. Accordingly, Okonkwo corrects him by constantly nagging and beating. He sees Nwoye as irredeemably effeminate, constantly comparing him with his father. Regardless of the measures taken, Okonkwo strives to gain his tribe's respect to compensate for his father's failure as a man. He built his life out of poverty and made a title for himself. The elders of their village preached that if a child washed his hands, he could eat with kings, and Okonkwo clearly did so as he ate with kings and elders. Okonkwo's motivation was to be the opposite of his father, and which increases his self-esteem, as Enoka was his prime example of a failed attempt at manhood. Throughout the novel, Okonkwo's behavior is described to have originated from his desire to disassociate from his father. It was not external, but lay deep within himself. Okonkwo's fear was of himself, lest he should be found to resemble his father. As a result, Okonkwo strives towards increasing his low self-esteem through traditional male roles. He was determined to earn himself a title signifying his manhood. For example, during his early teenage years, he begged a rich farmer for yam seeds, as they were known as the king of crops, a man's crop. This was also the turning point towards his success, as after surviving treacherous harvests, the growth of his yams eventually became his way to riches, showcasing his resilience and strive for success. Pursuing traditional male roles may cause men to resort to acts of violence in hopes of maintaining masculinity. In order for men to feel accepted in society, they may feel compelled to conform to traditional male roles to maintain their masculinity. As a result, if their masculinity is threatened, men may seek ways to assert dominance in potential fear of cultural rejection. Violent acts may be viewed as a form of masculinity, which enables men to potentially exhibit their strength and power. Thus, for men to pursue traditional male roles, they may display violent manners. In Okonkwo's culture, they follow traditional gender roles where women submit to their husbands while men are expected to be providers for the family. Even when Okonkwo lived in Mbada, his deceased mother's village, traditional gender roles were still present. Ochendu, Okonkwo's uncle, expresses the stereotype that men are the head of the family and his wives do his bidding. Nonetheless, Okonkwo took the idea of traditional male roles to an extreme, as his clan only acknowledges strong men. Although Okonkwo loved his sons, Ikefuna in particular, he never showed any emotions openly unless it was anger. He believes affection was a sign of weakness and the only thing worth demonstrating was strength. In pursuit of traditional masculinity, Okonkwo has tendencies to alienate others. Okonkwo is brusque when dealing with less successful men. When a man contradicted his thought at a kindred meeting, he said, "This meeting is for men," as the man had no titles, essentially calling him a woman. Thus, as Okonkwo pursues traditional male roles, he becomes prone to resorting to violence in order to maintain his masculinity. Even during the week of peace, Okonkwo almost beats his wife to death after she failed to prepare dinner for him and braided her hair instead. If men commit acts of violence, this may lead to them experiencing feelings of guilt. Violent tendencies may be connected to a person's childhood and cultural expectations. The fear of cultural rejection and the need for control can tend to progress into violent outbursts. Although these acts of violence may come from rash actions, they are not always intended. Therefore, after committing acts of violence, men may potentially recognize the wrongs of their actions. Thus, committing acts of violence may potentially lead to them experiencing feelings of guilt. Okonkwo is embarrassed of his father because of his unsuccessfulness, leading to frustration. He does everything in his power to not be like his father, hence his hatred is most likely because he is ashamed and frustrated. Since Enoka was of gentle nature, Okonkwo became the opposite. Enoka's incompetence instilled a fear of cultural rejection in Okonkwo, where he developed a constant need to assert dominance over everyone and only show strength. Although Okonkwo is described to rule his household with a heavy hand, his fear of failure and weakness was said to be more intimate than fear of evil and capricious gods. Rather than using words, Okonkwo resorts to violence as a means of expression. When a storm breaks out and one of his banana trees breaks, he suppresses his anger until finally finding an outlet. His second wife confesses to using a few of the leaves to cook dinner, where Okonkwo puts the entire blame on her and gives her a sounding beating. Okonkwo's violent actions are sometimes irrational but proceeds in fear of cultural rejection. Although Okonkwo was fond of Ikefima, after hearing his cry for help, he drew his machete, delivering the final blow, killing him. Okonkwo didn't want to seem weak amongst his clansmen and thus performed this irreversible act. After committing various acts of violence towards others, Okonkwo realizes his wrongful actions and feels guilt. Following the death of Ikefima, Okonkwo did not eat anything for 2 days, and his eyes were described to be bloodshot red like a rat. Okonkwo felt guilt and remorse after taking part in the execution, and whenever he tried not to think of Ikefuma, the more he did, implicitly showing his love for his passing son. When a child grows up in a financially challenged household, they may develop low self-esteem. Typically, men with low self-esteem may seek higher self-esteem following traditional male roles. In order to maintain masculinity, when men pursue traditional male roles, they may become susceptible to performing acts of violence. When men commit acts of violence, they may then experience feelings of guilt.